Καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ήρθατε στο Kotzen Hall, στην Αμερικανική Σχολή Κλασικών Σπουδών στην Αθήνα. Είμαι η Μαρία Γεωργοπούλου, Διευθύντρια της Γεναδίου Βιβλιοθήκης. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Kotzen Hall in the American School of Classical Studies. I will, the presentation is in English, and I will just read a few things in Greek and in English. Όπως ξέρετε όλοι σας, η Γενάδιος διαθέτει μια παράμιλη συλλογή περιηγητικών κειμένων και μια εντυπωσιακή συλλογή για το Βύρωνα. Και πιστεύω ότι για τον Ιωάννη Γενάδιο ο Λόρδος Βύρων ήταν ο κατεξοχήν φιλέλληνας που με τα ποίηματά του και τον πρόωρο θάνατό του ενέπνευσε τους Ευρωπαίους να στηρίξουν την Ελληνική Επανάσταση. Και η σημερινή μας παρουσίαση ουσιαστικά συνδέει αυτά τα δύο, τον περιηγητισμό, τον Grand Tour και τον Λόρδο Βύρωνα, και γι' αυτό ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ τους δύο μιλητές που πρότειναν αυτό το θέμα. So, as you probably most of you know, the Gennadios Library boasts an impressive collection of books about Byron and a collection of things and memorabilia of Lord Byron, in addition to a very well-known collection of travelers' books of the early modern period. Lord Byron was, for Ioannis Genadios, I think, the most important, the most symbolic Philhellene. So it is for that reason that he had a collection of his books, his works, but also things that belonged to Lord Byron. And so it is this year, the 200th anniversary from the death of Lord Byron. It is because of this commemoration because of this date that our two speakers, Anne McCabe and Ilias Kolovos, are here tonight to present their work. These two esteemed scholars, Anne McCabe and Ilias Kolovos, will delve into the fascinating story of how Byron secured the firman from the Sultan, allowing him to travel through Ottoman Europe and the Ottoman Empire in 1810. Ilias Kolovos is a professor of Ottoman history at the University of Crete, and he's working with Ottoman archives in Greece and Turkey, of course. He's an expert in paleography, and I think we will see some of his sort of skills at work tonight. He's a specialist, and he specializes in Ottoman Turkish paleography, as I said, and in Mediterranean economic history, and focuses on the history of islands, frontiers, rural and environmental history, as well as the legacies of the Ottoman Empire. Anne McCabe is a research associate at the Center for the Study of Ancient Documents in Oxford, at the University of Oxford, and with a focus on manuscript treatises in agriculture and medicine. She has published on the Ipiatrika and is working a treatise on horses, and is working now on completing a corpus of Byzantine inscriptions in Constantinople and its hinterland. She has also worked as an archaeologist at the Athenian Agora and the Al-Andarin excavations in Syria. And I have to say that for us here at the American School and at the Genadios Library, her primary role, other than being a scholar, is that she's an overseer of the Genadios Library, and she has enriched our rare book collections with gifts over the years. So I will not take any more of your time. So I invite you to join me in welcoming them both on stage to speak to us about Byron's passport to immortality.
Thank you, Maria, for your kind introduction. As you said, Lord Byron is no stranger to the Genadios Library. And 50 years ago, on the occasion of the 150th anniversary since the poet's death, Francis Walton, then director of the library, published a list of the items of Byroniana, the relics, and memorabilia in the library's collection. Many of them had been lent to the Benaki and Victoria and Albert museums for commemorative exhibitions then. So that was the 150th anniversary. As you mentioned, 2024 is the 200th anniversary since the poet's death at Messolongi at the age of 36. As I'm sure you're all well aware by now, since there have been many festive commemorations this year already. But for this reason, we're happy to present a new document relating to Lord Byron, an unpublished document, an Ottoman firman of Sultan Mahmud II, which is a passport or laissez-passer, a sort of visa document for travel in the Ottoman Empire in 1810.
This is an original document, an imperial order or firman, Fermani al-Lishan in Ottoman Turkish, bearing the calligraphic monogram, this is called the Tughra, of Sultan Mahmud II, reigned between 1808 and 1838. He was the Sultan the Greeks rebelled against. The document was issued before the Greek Revolution, between 21 to 30 Zilhijjah 1224, corresponding to end of January, beginning of February 1810. And it was issued in Constantinople. This is the place of issuance in Ottoman Turkish, bi makami Konstantiniye. They still use in official documents the Arabic adaptation of the Greek name of the city of Constantine.
So it's let's see, I think we need one more. Perfect. It's a large sheet of white laid paper with dimensions corresponding to the Italian imperiale size produced for the Ottoman market, commonly used in imperial decrees. So you see it's 53 by 59 centimeters, plus at the top there's an extra 15 centimeters blank that's folded backwards. The watermark and countermark consist of a crescent moon, which you can see there. It has a little face, and here a crossbow and arrow with the initials AM in Latin characters, which would seem to imply that the paper was produced in Europe. The surface is burnished. This is to prevent fraud, since it's more difficult to scrape off writing from a polished surface. And the paper is folded, as was conventional for travel. Such documents were often carried in a little bag called kese. And ours is stained on what must have been the exposed surfaces, as you can see here. Could it have been from Lord Byron's sweat? Now, John Cam Hobhouse, Byron's friend and travel companion, wrote in his wonderful journey through Albania and other provinces of Turkey in Europe and Asia to Constantinople during the years 1809 and 1810. The book was published in London in 1813, and it's really a good read, full of archaeological and other information. So Hobhouse writes, "Our firman arrived from Constantinople on the 30th of April. That would be 1810. And at the time, Hobhouse and Byron were aboard the English frigate Salsette near the Dardanelles."
So, why do we think it is the same firman? Hobhouse has produced in his journey a facsimile, I'm quoting, of Sultan Mahmud's cipher, taken on a scale of half less than that of the original, from our traveling firman. The cipher reads in Ottoman Turkish, Mahmud Khan bin Abdul Hamid el Muzaffer Daima. That is, Mahmud Khan, son of Abdul Hamid, Semper Victor, that is, always victorious. Here is a portrait of Sultan Mahmud II before he adopted Western dress. He was a reformer of many institutions, the Peter the Great of Turkey. And here are the firman and Hobhouse's facsimile, half size, together. So it makes sense.
So for the first part of their trip, they had no firman. Hobhouse explains that while they were in the domains of Ali Pasha, the imperial firman is but little respected, whilst a letter with the signature of Ali commands unlimited obedience. So here's Hobhouse's facsimile of the laissez-passer from Ali Pasha for safe travel to Mesolongi. And it's written in Greek, and Hobhouse also gives an English translation here at the right.
Now, here is a portrait of Ali Pasha by Louis Dupré. Ali Pasha, the Lion of Ioannina, had for almost 40 years semi-independent authority in a vast area of western Greece and Albania. Byron and Hobhouse visited him in his hometown of Tepeleni, nowadays in Albania. They did, however, need an imperial firman for travel outside of Ali Pasha's domains. Hobhouse writes in his journal, I'm quoting, "We had some difficulty in procuring horses at Thebes, as we were not provided with a traveling firman from the port." This is end of 1809, and the firman we found was issued beginning of 1810, and they got it in their hands in spring. As we had now left the dominions of our patron Ali, and we're in the territory of Bekir Pasha of the Negroponte, Chalkida, Chalkis, it looks like they had this difficulty in getting provisions. Now, according to our document, in response to a petition by Robert Adair, ambassador of England to the Sublime Porte, Sultan Mahmud II grants permission to the aristocrats, berây is the wording in Ottoman Turkish, the aristocrats from England, Lord Byron and Mr. Boron, maybe we are guessing Hobhouse, who else, together with 2 couriers and 4 of their foreign servants. These were Byron's faithful valet, William Fletcher, the Albanians Dervish and Vasili, and a Greek interpreter. To travel, permission to travel in Ottoman lands. The document follows a standard form, beginning with the imperial tugra, the monogram, and continuing with an address, salutation, the body of the decree, actions to be taken, a warning about enforcing it, and finally, the date and place at which it was issued.
So, Robert Adair, who obtained the passport for Byron, was ambassador to the Sublime Porte from 1808 to 1810. He helped bring about the peace after the Anglo-Turkish War of 1807 to 1809. The treaty is alluded to in our firman. And he wrote a big book about his experiences, entitled The Negotiations for the Peace of the Dardanelles, published in London in 1845. Now, Adair would have communicated the request to the Porte through a dragoman or translator. The dragomans were men of Levantine families who were familiar with different languages and cultures, and played an important role in diplomacy and communication. According to a recent study by Natalie Rotman, dragomans were crucial actors in many of the political and commercial arenas of the region, where their role far exceeded rendering a speaker's message in another language. Dragomans' social background, as well as the institutional parameters of their work, evolved over the centuries thanks to their sustained interactions across linguistic and juridical boundaries. Now, the first dragoman of the British Embassy at the time was called Bartolomeo Pisani. He had been hired by a previous ambassador, Lord Elgin, who's not unknown to you. It may have been Pisani who helped with Byron's request, or it may have been the second dragoman, François Chabert, who was Bartolomeo Pisani's brother-in-law and who's depicted in this painting.
Byron was fortunate enough to have an audience with the Sultan on the occasion of Robert Adair's departure from Constantinople, and Hobhouse gives a vivid account of the scene. The chamber was small and dark, or rather illumined with a gloomy artificial light, reflected from the ornaments of silver, pearls, and other white brilliants, with which it is thickly studded on every side and the roof. The throne, which is supposed to be the richest in the world, is like a four-posted bed, but of a dazzling splendor. The lower part formed of burnished silver and pearls, and the canopy and supporters encrusted with jewels. It is in an awkward position, being in one corner of the room and close to a fireplace. Sultan Mahmud was dressed in a robe of yellow satin with a broad border of the darkest sable. His dagger and an ornament on his breast were covered with diamonds. The front of his white and blue turban shone with a large treble sprig of diamonds, which served as a buckle to a high straight plume of bird of paradise feathers. He, for the most part, kept a hand on each knee, and neither moved his body nor head, but rolled his eyes from side to side, without fixing them for an instant upon the ambassador or any person present. Occasionally, he stroked and turned up his beard, displaying a milk-white hand glittering with diamond rings. His eyebrows, eyes, and beard, being of a glossy jet black, did not appear natural, but added to that indescribable majesty which it would be difficult for any but an Oriental sovereign to assume. His whole physiognomy was mild and benevolent, but expressive and full of dignity. And you get an idea of Hobhouse's detailed account Byron was detesting.
Yes, the two friends had different styles, but they complemented each other. This painting was made about 40 years earlier than Byron's and Hobhouse's visit, but you can recognize the scene described. And this is a reception for the French ambassador, who's here in a tricorn hat. This is the dragoman of the Porte next to him, and this is the Grand Vizier, and there's the Sultan. And you can recognize, you know, the golden throne in an awkward corner next to the fireplace, which is there.
Now, allow us to read our translation of the document into English in detail. The ambassador of the State of England to my Sublime Porte, the model of the commanders of the Christian religion, Robert Adair, Esquire, may God conclude his latter moments with good, submitted a sealed official note to my imperial cognizance, while on horseback with the following content. 2 aristocrats from England, namely Lord Byron and Mr. Byron, together with 2 couriers and 4 of their foreign servants, desired to travel, seyâhat is the word, from my Sublime Porte, that is Constantinople, to the Morea, Salonica, Athens, the White Sea, that is the Aegean, Smyrna, Aydin, the province in which Ephesus is located, and to Old Istanbul, namely Alexandria Troas, and its surroundings, that is the Troad. There is still a question mark in my reading of the second name after Lord Byron. This is how you read Ottoman Turkish from right to, it's in Ottoman script or Arabic script from right. So it says Lord Byron and Mr. Bisolboron. It may simply result from a misreading of the name Hobhouse, written out by hand. The translation goes on. The ambassador made a formal demand for the issuance of a noble order, so that the aforementioned aristocrats, together with their 2 couriers at their sides and their 4 foreign servants, on their way to the aforementioned destinations on the road, and in their stops and in the places they find accommodation, will not be oppressed or vexed in violation of the imperial treaty by the poll tax collectors or others asking from them to pay the poll tax, or by others with other excuses.
So the document ends with a sultanic order of Mahmud II, repeating Ambassador Adair's request. Now I have issued an imperial order addressing to you the judicial and other aforementioned officials, since, according to the clauses of friendship and sincerity of the enduring treaty between my Sublime Porte and the State of England, the visitors and their men must be protected. You shall not let the aforementioned aristocrats, together with their 2 couriers and their 4 foreign servants, on their way from my Sublime Porte to the aforementioned destinations, in their stops and in the places they find accommodation, be oppressed or vexed by the poll tax collectors, asking for them to pay the poll tax, or by others with other excuses. They must be protected with formal courtesy while they are visiting their destinations, being escorted by brave guides in their payroll when they cross dangerous and frightening places. You must consider very carefully to protect their itinerary.
The verso of the document has several small signatures with long tails, the so-called Acre in French or Kuyruklu imza in Turkish. This name is probably Mehmet. He validated the imperial order with his signature as the head of the finance department and the head of the poll tax collectors.
So Hobhouse describes these countersignatures being executed, and how astonishing it was to see high officials of the Ottoman court or navy acting as calligraphers. He writes, on the day of visiting the navy, we waited first on the Tersane Emine, that's superintendent of the Admiralty, whom we found with a kind of painting apparatus and a hair pencil, drawing a sprig or floweret upon small bits of written paper. The ornaments were the signets which the intendant's duty was to affix. Hobhouse's reference to small bits of paper implies that the documents were already folded up. Now, Louis Dupré, the painter, in his magnificently illustrated book Voyage à Athènes et à Constantinople, gives a facsimile and a translation of his own travel firman from 1818, including the countersignatures from the reverse, which he shows here at the bottom of the page. And it looks like he had a fancy toura in red.
Now, the firman or visa makes clear that the 2 aristocrats from England had planned ahead of time for their tour in the Ottoman Empire, requesting, with a letter now missing, but perhaps somewhere in the UK National Archives, a letter to the ambassador of England to the Sublime Porte, permission for a certain type of visit, a Greek-Turkish tour, we can say. The Napoleonic Wars made the more conventional Italian itinerary impossible at this time. From Byron's letters and Hobhouse's book, we can match their actual itinerary with their planned one. They visited every place named in the firman except for Salonica. In a letter to Henry Drury on board the Salsette, the frigate, 3rd of May 1810, Byron describes his travels. We stopped a short time in the Morea, crossed the Gulf of Lepanto, and landed at the foot of Parnassus, so all that Delphi retains, and so on to Thebes and Athens. His Majesty's ship, Pylades, brought us to Smyrna, but not before we had topographized Attica, including, of course, Marathon and the Sunian promontory. From Smyrna to the Troad, which we visited when at Acre for a fortnight, was our next stage. And now we are in the Dardanelles, waiting for a wind to proceed to Constantinople. I omitted Ephesus in my catalogue, which I visited during my sojourn at Smyrna. Here is a map showing the places Byron visited in the Eastern Mediterranean an itinerary worthy of an American School of Classical Studies tour.
Now, one could illustrate nearly every phase of their journey with paintings by Edward Dodwell, who traveled a few years earlier, or by Otto Magnus von Stackelberg, who was there at the same time, or by Louis Dupré, who came a few years later. But we'll resist that temptation and just show a few of their delineations. Here's one of the places that Byron and Hobhouse visited on the way. It's the house of the Bishop of Salona at a village called Chryso near Delphi. And the bishop lent Byron a book, The Geography of Meletius the monk. I'm sure we have several copies in the Gennadius. Byron kept it, he never gave it back, and he took it back to England and later confessed that he'd stolen it from the bishop. But it might have been useful for their travels. And Byron and Hobhouse took 10 days to go from Delphi to Athens, and they arrived on Christmas Day in 1809, and they stayed in Athens for 10 weeks. Now, we saw Louis Dupré's Firman. Here's his painting of Byron's friend Fauvel, the French consul, at home in Athens. Fauvel's house was in the area of Vrissaki, which Sylvie has made a magnificent exhibition about next door. And the house was discovered during the course of the Athenian Agora excavations. You can see Fauvel's wonderful view of the Acropolis and the dome of the Church of the Holy Apostles. And Byron and Hobhouse stayed nearby, renting rooms at the house of Mrs. Macri, who was widow of the British consul. Mrs. Macri's house was a bit further north in Psyri. And here's a portrait in the Gennadius collection of her daughter, Teresa Macri, the young maid of Athens, to whom Byron addressed his famous poem before departing for Istanbul on the 5th of March, 1810. And so he writes, "Though I fly to Istanbul, Athens holds my heart and soul. Can I cease to love thee? No, zoimu sasagapo."
On their way to Istanbul, there were a few delays. Byron and Hobhouse spent a couple of weeks near Tenedos, waiting for their firman and for favorable winds. During this time, they explored the Troad, described as Old Istanbul, Eski Istanbul, and surroundings in the firman. Hobhouse produced this very detailed map for his book.
So the map is a bit confusing because north is actually on the left and east is on top. But you can see the Hellespont on the left and the Tenedos, the island of Tenedos at the bottom. So it was just after they received the firman that Byron swam across the Hellespont in emulation of the myth of Leander, who swam to visit his girlfriend Hero every night. One of the officers from the ship accompanied him and swam across in an hour and 5 minutes. Byron made it in an hour and 10 minutes. And it was a feat which he immortalized in verse. He swam across the narrowest part. He said there was a strong current and it was very cold. And so the current sends you downstream. And of course, these days, I think this year, the Byron swim is done by hundreds of people across the Hellespont, stopping shipping traffic every year. So these are the verses. "If in the month of dark December, Leander, who was knightly wont, what lad will not the tale remember, to cross thy stream broad Hellespont? If when the wintry tempest roared, he sped to Hero, nothing loath, and thus of old thy current poured, fair Venus, how I pity both. For me, degenerate modern wretch, though in the genial month of May, my dripping limbs I faintly stretch, and think I've done a feat today. But since he crossed the rapid tide, according to the doubtful story, to woo, and Lord knows what beside, and swam for love as I for glory, 'twere hard to say who fared the best. Sad mortals, thus the gods still plague you. He lost his labor, I my jest, for he was drowned, and I've the ague." And here you see a rather sentimental painting of Byron resting after his swim at the house of a Turkish fisherman and being served tea by the fisherman's daughter, book in hand, probably composing the poem.
Byron was fascinated by the Turks, and in 1807, at age 19, he wrote, "Of the Ottoman history, I know every event, from Tangralopi, maybe Tugrul Bey, founder of the Seljuk Empire, and afterwards Othman I, to the Peace of Passarovitz in 1718, the Battle of Kutska in 1789, and the treaty between Russia and Turkey in 1790. Once he reached Constantinople, he writes in a letter to his mother, "I have been in all the principal mosques by virtue of a firman. This is a favor rarely permitted to infidels, but the ambassador's departure obtained it for us." 18 June 1810. The frigate Salsette left Constantinople on the 13th of July 1810, and 4 days later left Lord Byron at the harbor of Kea, near Athens, while Hobhouse returned to England.
So Byron spent the winter of 1810 to 1811 in Athens. How did he spend his time? Well, here you see his manuscript translation of a Greek folk song with the note, "Μπαίνουμε στο περιβόλι, ωραιότατη χαϊδή," the song from which this is taken, is most fashionable with the young girls of Athens of all classes. I have heard it frequently at our balls in the winter of 1810 to 1811. And the song was transcribed for him by Dudu Rock, who's depicted in Dupray's album on the left. And the poem was published in Hesperia in 1945 by the eminent epigrapher A. Raubicek. You can see on the right Dudu Rock's transcription of the song, and on the left Byron's note saying, "Greek song copied out for me in Athens, April 19th, 1811, by Dudu Rock, the daughter of a French merchant of that city, previous to my leaving Greece." So during his second stay at Athens, Byron resided at the Capuchin monastery built around the Corrigic monument of Lysicrides. It was there that he wrote the Curse of Minerva, his diatribe against Lord Elgin. And this is a view inside the monastery. You can see the monk in the library, which is inside the Lysicrides monument.
It was with Nicolas Giraud, a student at the Capuchin convent, who became his lover, that Byron visited the Morea, Corinth, Patras, Tripolitsa, Olympia, and Argos.
When they were in Corinth, and this is a picture of Acre, Corinth, by Dodwell. When they were in Corinth, the firman was ignored, and Byron wrote to Stratford Canning, the British ambassador to the Sublime Porte, from Athens on the 13th of October 1810, complaining to the management. Byron writes, "I cannot address you without an apology, the more especially as I write in the character of a complainant. In traveling from the Morea to Athens, the Bey of Corinth for some time refused me a lodging, and this at a time when the inclemency of the weather made it an act not only of impoliteness, but of inhumanity. It was indeed one of those days when an enemy's dog would have been sheltered." And oops. And here is Stackelberg, I mentioned, was in Athens at the same time as Byron. And this is his drawing of the very comfortable looking inn at Corinth, which the travelers were not allowed to stay at.
Now, Byron, he liked the place and was planning to continue his trip. "I expect," he writes to Hobhouse, Athens, 5 March 1811, "I expect great things from the coming summer, and if well and wealthy, shall go to Jerusalem, for which I have a firman." Now, this firman, this is a second one, is still in the possession of the family, kept in the Bodleian Library, Lovelace Papers, and we are grateful to Byron's descendant, Lord Lytton, for his kind permission to study the document, and to Nico Kontovas, curator of Ottoman manuscripts at the Bodleian Library, for his invaluable help. Again, we're dealing with an original document, an imperial order, or firman, bearing again the calligraphic monogram up here of the same Sultan Mahmud II. The document was again issued in Constantinople, now between 11 to 12 Zilkade 1225, corresponding to the end of November, beginning of December 1810, a few months later than the first firman, which was from January, February.
So all these confusing dates are because of the translating the Islamic Hijra date to our Annus Domini, and also the transition between the Julian and Gregorian calendars. But you get the picture. This firman was issued just a few months after the previous one. So it's, again, a sheet of very strong white laid paper, approximately 72 by 52 centimeters, imperiale size, like Byron's other firman. The watermark and countermark consist of 3 crescents, which you can see at the right, 1, 2, 3. And this was a conventional watermark used for Ottoman papers, Ottoman documents. And then there's also a heraldic device with a sort of Saladi coat of arms, which you can sort of see on the left there. And this document was also folded, as you can see, but it's perfectly clean since it was never used.
Now, according to this document, the second firman, in response to a petition by the Middle Ambassador, that is Minister Plenipotentiary of England in the Sublime Porte, now Stratford Canning, Sultan Mahmud II grants permission to the aristocrat from England, Lord Byron, now he's only himself, together with 1 guard and 4 of his foreign servants, to visit Ziyâret, starting from the island of Cyprus, Acre, Sidon, Jerusalem, Damascus, Alexandretta, Egypt and its surroundings, and then return to the Sublime Porte, that is Constantinople. Now, the second firman or visa suggests that Lord Byron, in continuation of his Greek-Turkish tour, was planning a Holy Land tour of the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire. And the wording is different. Seyâhat, it's the tour. Ziyâret, in the second case, is more like a pilgrimage. It has also a religious connotation in Ottoman Turkish.
So Stratford Canning, who petitioned for the firman on Byron's behalf, had accompanied Robert Adair to Constantinople in 1809 as first secretary. After Adair's departure from Constantinople in 1810, Canning became minister plenipotentiary, and he later served as ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, 1825 to 1827, then again 1831 to 32, 1842 to 58, and he was known as the Great Ambassador. And for his sentiments toward Greece, we have Platia Kaningos here in Athens. Now, the request would have been made via a dragoman of the embassy, and here's a painting of a dragoman commissioned by Canning himself, and now at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And in Hobhouse's diary, he notes that Canning had shown them a costume album of watercolors. So in a newly discovered letter from Byron to Hobhouse from Athens, dated 28th of February 1811 and published last spring in honor of the 200 years anniversary by Catherine Sutherland in the Times Literary Supplement, Byron mentions having received this firman. So you see here a quotation, having received a firman for Jerusalem, Syria, etc., it is my intention in spring to pass to Smyrna and thence to Palestine.
Since Byron was a child, he had been fascinated by the East. He had read the Quran, the Arabian Nights, the Orientalist novel Vathek. Here is a map showing the Holy Land where he was planning to go. But Byron's mother died in August 1811, and he returned to England, never making the trip to the Levant and Egypt.
So both of these firmans follow the official template of the Ottoman chancery. The texts note the aristocratic status of Byron and his companion. They emphasize the cordial relations between the two states after the end of the Anglo-Turkish War. They list the destinations of the Orientalist Grand Tour in Turkish, and they make thorough provision for the safety, well-being, and freedom from taxation, very important, of the travelers and their retinue. But the first firman, worn and stained from being carried on long travels, is not simply a routine administrative document, but an important document in the history of literature and in the history of modern Greece, since it permitted the journeys which inspired some of Byron's best-known poems and kindled his Philhellenism. It's a piece of evidence for Byron's well-known transformation from a sarcastic schoolboy, making fun of the study of ancient Greek in England. Here he writes, thoughts suggested by a college examination in 1806. Happy the youth in Euclid's axioms tried, though little versed in any art beside, who, scarcely skilled in English line to pen, scans Attic meters with a critic's ken. Of Grecian dramas vaunts the deathless flame, of Avon's bard, that's Shakespeare, remembering scarce the name. So Byron, before he went to Greece, he was disdainful of antiquities, mocking collectors and archaeologists alike. Here he writes, let Aberdeen and Elgin still pursue the shade of fame through regions of virtue, waste useless thousands on their Phidian freaks, misshapen monuments and maimed antiques. Of Dardan tours let dilettanti tell, I leave topography to classic gel. Of course, once he started traveling, he became a conventional grand tourist, carving his name all over the place at Delphi and here at Sunion. But then, after living in the region for some time, he became one of the most fervent and famous Philhellenes of all time, through his writings influencing worldwide opinion in favor of the Greek uprising against Ottoman rule. And here you see him fully converted, although he disguises this as a poem within a poem in Don Juan. The Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sung, where grew the arts of war and peace, where Delos rose and Phoebus sprung. Eternal summer gilds them yet, but all except their sun is set. The mountains look on Marathon, and Marathon looks on the sea, and musing there an hour alone, I dreamed that Greece might still be free. For, standing on the Persian's grave, I could not deem myself a slave. Place me on Sunium's marbled steep, where nothing save the waves and I may hear our mutual murmurs sweep. There, swan-like, let me sing and die. A land of slaves shall ne'er be mine, dash down yon cup of Samian wine. And there you see Sunium with the marbles by Simone Pomardi, who traveled with Dodwell just a few years earlier than Byron. And then finally, the end of the transformation, Byron's contributions to the Greek cause during the revolution and his death from fever at Missolonghi turned him into a hero of the revolution. And here you see also from the Gennadius collection the laurel wreath, which was sent from Missolonghi to London when Byron's body was lying in state.
Now, Mahmud II could scarcely have imagined, when he granted these privileges to Lord Byron, that the grand tourist would subsequently become a key figure in the rebellion against his rule. The Sultan was absolutely furious, and I'm advertising the book we did with two of my colleagues with the translations of the documents Mahmud II issued on the first year of the Greek revolution, expressing exactly his anger against the Greeks. Have we finished?
But wait, there's more. We'd like to consider one more firman by way of comparison. Ilya?
It's me. Diffrey Williams, in his paper Lord Elgin's Firman, published in the Journal of the History of Collections in 2009, publishes this photo, courtesy of the current Lord Elgin, and a translation into French by Antoine Pisani of the British Embassy, of another, now a third one, original imperial order bearing the calligraphic monogram of Sultan Selim III. Now, this is not our Mahmud II, it's a previous Sultan, reigned between 1789, the year of the French Revolution, to 1807. The document was issued again in Constantinople between 11 to 12 Zilkade 1216, corresponding to March 1802, so 8 years before our Lord Byron's firmans. Here's a portrait of Selim III. Now, according to this document, in response, which is very similar to the documents we have examined, in response to a petition by the ambassador of England to the Sublime Porte, Elgin, Sultan Selim III issues an imperial permission for him to travel from the imperial capital, Constantinople, to Chios and other islands of the White Sea, that is the Aegean, and stay there for some time in order to help him recover, per his doctor's advice, from his illness. His family, children, and foreign servants will accompany him. During their trip and stay in their preferred place, he has permission to acquire provisions, paying for them, and be protected according to the friendship and alliance between England and the Ottoman Empire. What was his illness? The rumor was that it was syphilis. According to Gillian Seawood, in her paper on Mourning the Marbles, it seems, I'm quoting, that the wasting disease of dubious origin had eaten away a considerable portion of his face, and keep in mind this detail because Byron will use it in a poem. Now, as it is evident from Lord Elgin's Firman, asking for a medical leave in the islands of the Aegean Sea because he needs a change of air, as well as from the firmans Lord Byron had issued for his grand tours, the mobility and movement of the subjects of the English state in the Ottoman Empire was legally subject to imperial permissions by the Ottoman sultans, based on the particular treaties, the capitulations between the two countries. We would necessarily expect an imperial permission for any movement of objects, like the Parthenon marbles, from the Ottoman Empire abroad. There is none located so far.
This was recently noted by Zeynep Boz from the Turkish Ministry of Culture at a UNESCO meeting. Now, while Robert Adair was helping Byron to obtain his first travel firman in 1809, he was also asked by George Canning, who I think was the nephew of Stratford Canning, to help Lord Elgin ship the last batch of marbles from Athens to London. And so George Canning writes to Adair, "Sir, Lord Elgin, having represented to me that there are now lying at Athens several very valuable antiques which his lordship collected in the Levant, and which he has hitherto been prevented by the war with the Porte from transporting to this country, I am to desire that your Excellency will use your utmost exertion to prevail upon the Ottoman government to permit the transportation of these articles, and that you will take such measures as may appear to you to be the most advisable to ensure their safe conveyance to England." Now Adair wrote back saying, "My lord, I have the honor of informing your lordship that I have, at length succeeded in obtaining an order from the kaimakam to the voivode of Athens, it's the kaimakam, not the sultan, for the embarkation without further obstruction of the antiquities collected by Lord Elgin and now lying at Athens. So in April 1811, the ship Hydra carried Byron away from Athens along with Elgin's agent Lucieri, who had toured around Athens with Byron, and also along with the last shipment of Elgin's antiquities. Adair wrote to Elgin, "I have to inform your lordship that Mr. Pisani," we remember Bartolomeo Pisani, the first dragoman of the British embassy in Constantinople, "Mr. Pisani more than once assured me that the Porte absolutely denied your having any property in these marbles." And here's Adair's draft of his letter to Elgin. I think that Leonore Navari was the one who transcribed this. Now, Lady Elgin, in a letter to her parents, recounts how her husband had bullied the dragoman Pisani about firmans, and how Pisani had taken to his bed and gone on strike. So Pisani evidently felt that there was something fishy about Elgin's collecting antiquities. She writes, "Lord Elgin gave Pisani a most amazing rattle about the passports, etc., insomuch that Pisani said, as he had found, notwithstanding all his endeavor, he could not please His Excellency, and as his health materially suffered by the pressure of business, he hoped Elgin would allow him to retire. All Pisani's past misdemeanors were brought in a string before him, and I fancy he never got such a rattle in his life." Of course, Byron also attacked Elgin on the subject of the marbles in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, the poem that made him famous, and also in The Curse of Minerva, written in the Capuchin convent here in Athens, a poem that was censored during Byron's lifetime. So there are verses that were even expunged from the printed poem that circulated. "Ah, Athens, scarce escaped from Turk and Goth, hell sends a paltry Scotchman worse than both." And then there's a couplet written by Byron, recorded by Thomas Medwin. "Noseless himself, Elgin brings home noseless blocks to show what time has done and what the pox."
Well, Byron's firman is currently on display at the Acropolis Museum as an example of a legitimate imperial firman, in contrast with the letters from lower-ranking officials that Elgin used to remove the Parthenon sculpture. His real firman was for a medical leave, not for taking the marbles abroad. And here is a photo of the firman with Byron's direct descendant through his daughter Ada Lovelace, the Earl of Lytton. We think that Byron would have been pleased that his passport is being deployed in this way. We urge you to visit the exhibition and see it for yourselves. Thank you very much.
Ilia and Anne, thank you very much for this very detailed, very careful, and quite illuminating discussion of this amazing document. Can I ask start with the first question, because the floor is open for questions. What is the story of these documents? Why do we have it? And who owns this document?
Well, Maria, since you've asked, it's a fun story, and it begins in 1954, when my father, as a Princeton student, was invited to Greece for the first time. And like Lord Byron, he fell in love with the place, and when he returned to Princeton at the end of the summer, he asked if he could change his major from English to classics. And he was told no, because you don't know any ancient Greek. Now, I think these days it's possible to get a degree in classics from Princeton without knowing either ancient Greek or Latin, but in those days standards were different. So stuck in the English department, he wrote his senior thesis on Lord Byron and Greece, under the supervision of the legendary literary critic R.P. Blackmer, and the grader of the thesis was Edmund Keeley, who used to be an overseer of the library, I think. So my father collected maps of Greece and came to know a lot of rare book dealers. And he married an Athenian, my mother, who in 1980 found in a catalog of one of these dealers, H.P. Krauss in New York, she found this Ottoman document advertised as Lord Byron's passport. And she bought it for him for Christmas. And so it was hanging framed and so on the wall at home in New York since then, basically. And not neglected, much loved, but never published. And so a few months ago, in honor of the 200th anniversary of Byron's death, and because I had gotten to know Ilias Kolovos in connection with his work on Patmos, and because he's the world's expert on decrees of Sultan Mahmud II and has written this book, The Wrath of the Sultan, which you saw a picture of, we got in touch, and so a preliminary reading had been done by a friend, Ömer Koç, who had confirmed that it was indeed Byron's passport and not the Sultan's laundry list or something. But Ilias has done justice to it, I think, and we're very grateful to him for that.
So we are extremely grateful, not only to your mother, whom we miss a lot, for having a keen eye and a wonderful sense of what to offer to a husband, but also for you and Robert McCabe for sharing this with the world, through the Acropolis Museum. And
well, also thanks to
thank
Professor
Nikos
Stamboulidis,
yes.
who...
Thank you.
And Professor Stamboulidis, in connection with this beautiful small exhibition, which is in the lobby of the Acropolis Museum and open to the public without a ticket, he's produced a very elegant book about Byron and the Parthenon, which I urge you to go out and get.
Actually, it is only Nikos Stamboulidis who could turn an Ottoman document against Lord Elgin. But he did it. Thank you, Nikos.
So, the floor is open for questions, and I don't think you need me to mediate. So.
Thank you very much for this very interesting... Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. It was indeed very interesting. I would like... allow me a question. I didn't quite understand where this document, the first firman, is kept at the Acropolis Museum permanently, or it's kept somewhere else?
Well, until, for the last 40 years or so, it's been in New York. But now, thanks to Professor Stamboulidis, the director of the Acropolis Museum, it's on display at the museum in honor of the 200th anniversary of Lord Byron's death.
Yes, but temporarily, or it will remain for good?
Temporarily, I think, but it's there for a good cause. So yes, you have time to visit it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. We found out so much, and the detail about the manuscript is absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you for comparing Byron's firman with the Elgin firman. The comparison makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much. It was a very useful presentation, and it filled up so many gaps and details that we didn't know. However, there is one footnote I would like to bring your attention to. I noticed that Lord Elgin asked to visit the island of Chios. Why would he ask to visit the island of Chios of all the Aegean islands and of all the other places that he could on his way down from Constantinople. I can suggest one reason. From the middle of the 14th century, the Genoese had established in Chios a lepers colony which worked as a hospital for contagious diseases, and it was called the Holy Village, Iero Chorio. It started in the 1450s and lasted until the 1950. In other words, for 6 whole centuries, thanks to the support of the Genoese, who left Chios in the mid-16th century. It was discarded by the Ottomans because they felt that no Ottomans would ever contract leprosy. It was, so to speak, un-Ottoman disease. But of course, hundreds, thousands of Ottomans were nurtured in the Iero Chorio. And then it was maintained by the Greeks, especially the London Greeks, until the generation of the 1950s and the cure by Hansen, when it was closed. So I have a feeling, and I would like to suggest, that Lord Elgin came to the Iero Chorio because it was reputed as one of the places where contagious diseases could be cured. And certainly leprosy and other contagious diseases were hospitalized there and taken care of. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this footnote. I just want to add that the island of Chios is a big unknown, especially it was very much populated, but we do not have a lot of work done for Genoese Chios and Ottoman Chios as well. It's still a desideratum for research. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. This is just a very brief question about the documentary language. In the firman you showed us, there's a real emphasis on the status of the recipients, translated as aristocrats. Is this type of status elevation very typical of contemporary documents, or are we seeing an added degree of politeness because of the diplomatic context, let's say?
Well, Beizade was a word used for the Genovese aristocrats in Chios when the Ottomans conquered the island. Those who stayed, they were called Beizades. They were aristocrats. And it was also used for people like the Bay of Money. Beizades was the nickname of Petrobes Mavromichalis, if I'm not wrong, but it was used for the Maniot base as well. So it's, yes, it's a word showing aristocracy in the Ottoman context, where Ottoman society was supposed not to have aristocrats like in Western Europe, but after the 17th century there were a lot of aristocrats in the Ottoman society in Constantinople and in the provinces, and they were calling them, this was one of the terms that they used to call them. I don't know if...
Thank you, that's very interesting.
I might add that Ali Pasha was also very much interested in their aristocratic status. 2 aristocrats from England was, for Ali Pasha, the Greeks, the Ottomans, was a spectacle. I mean, they were coming like tourists in Greece, but they were a spectacle for the Ali Pasha Greeks as well. Ali Pasha, he says that he wanted to talk with them. He has meetings with them. I mean, they look at him, but he is also looking at them as curious, very curious, as interesting species. Imagine their dress, their attire, their manners.
I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed all of the things you'd said, and this is a question of out of ignorance. It's a period of tremendous investigation and people coming and recording, drawing, traveling through the lands. Did everyone need one of these, or were they restricted to high-level persons? I'm just thinking of all of the architects and travelers and writers that are coming through in just these decades, and wondering if these were ubiquitous or these are very rare documents with special privileges.
Dupré, he had a firman as well. We showed it. So, but I suppose only people of high, with some state connections could, pre-order a document, a passport for a tour like Lord Byron and Hobhouse did. So they had to have the connections to the ambassador of England at the Sublime Porte to order a firman. But we have the case of Louis Dupré. It's something very interesting to be investigated in a paper. To collect all these traveling firmans. They seem to be, we started with the one you had, but we're collecting more and more while looking for them.
There are more of them around. They just haven't had the attention they deserve. And it may be that some were lost or fell apart. Ours is rather tattered. And it's interesting to see how much ground they covered before obtaining the firman. I think when Byron and Hobhouse were in Malta, they got a ride to Preveza and Patras, and sort of they changed plans and they decided to go and visit Ali Pasha before going to Constantinople. So that's when they ran into difficulties without the firman, and that's when they got the letter from Ali Pasha for local travels in his domain. So yes.
Thank you.
I wish my passport gave me tax-free privileges and all of that.
Thank you very much. I would be interested to know if in earlier periods a firman was necessary, in the 16th and 17th centuries. Do you have any idea?
Very, very good question. I really don't know. Evliya Çelebi, the Ottoman traveler, while in his travels in the Ottoman Empire, he had a letter from a Greek patriarch in order to visit the Christian Orthodox monasteries, like he went to Meteora, Mount Athos. So, but this is all I know for the previous centuries. Yes. I'm not sure. It looks like it is something stemming out from the treaties between the State of England, the capitulations, and but I don't know, we do not have very early examples. Very good question.
Could I just add the following? There is an account by Dallam of accompanying an organ sent by, I think, Queen Elizabeth to the Sultan, and he describes his experiences there. And it's just curious, would he have needed some kind of permission? Anyway, thank you.
If there are no other questions, I wanted to thank our speakers for this brilliant presentation, and to invite you all for a glass of wine downstairs, and to say that our members of the American School, tomorrow they're going to Messolonghi, And I'm sure they will pay, I mean, it will be a pilgrimage to Lord Byron's tomb. Denver, you have to make sure of that. Thank you very much.